Bethesda, there is nothing I love more than to sit down, comfy chair, turn on my PC, fire up a brand new RPG, lose myself, think, oh my god, just think of this world, just think of all the planets I can visit, all the immersive things that I can get involved with, all the fights, all the relationships, all the people I meet, all the places I go. I'm so excited to go there. And you know, I love nothing more than, with all of that laid out in front of me, I love nothing more than to be dragged out at every conceivable opportunity so you can Parandeas. Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Pronouns! Gender ambiguity! Current day Californian shit! Because that's all we know! Because we're boring! We're so boring!
Video games are becoming too woke. The woke agenda is destroying gaming. Go woke, go broke. Why does it feel like more and more people are expressing these ideas? Or is it just that they've become louder and much more troublesome? Despite 64% of gamers indicating that diversity in games is important to them, ideas of wokeness, being the disease of gaming culture, continues to proliferate and build up within the gaming community. Diversity has become the enemy, and this idea has become a key tool of radicalizing gamers into these extremist worldviews. It can't be that serious, right? It's just kids that don't know what they're doing.
What the is Gamergate? Video game journalism?
10 years ago, Gamergate emerged as a year-long harassment campaign that consisted of backlash against feminism, diversity, and progressivism in video game culture. What began as white supremacists and extremists preaching towards disillusioned and disaffected young men led to the creation of something much more deeper and violent. Despite people involved in the campaign describing it as a movement for ethics in game journalism, this was more a cover to perpetuate harassment, doxing, and death threats towards women in the video game industry. Gamergate exposed to us a more insidious side of gaming culture that had already been festering through online forums and chats. The fear of losing the gamer identity drove the gaming community to coalesce into a hatred towards women and minorities. When you think of a gamer, you would normally picture someone like this, right? Gamer identity has been intensely correlated with white, straight male players, and games have been designed to appeal to them. Over the years, the audience for games expanded to include many who did not fit the traditional gamer demographic, particularly women. The games most popular with typical gamers were joined by a more diverse set of games that included themes outside of explicit violence and exaggerated gender stereotypes. Games like Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing that appealed to these new audiences were regarded as not real games, and effectively the individuals who played these were considered as not real gamers. When women play games such as Counter-Strike and Call of Duty, they are seen as challenging the status quo of gaming as a male-dominated space, and threatening traditional gaming culture. But why exactly are they so invested? What is it that they are arguing about against diversity? Firstly, let's understand the term woke and the meaning behind it. Emerging from African American slang, it refers to being socially aware and empathetic, with iterations of the slang found within literature by Jamaican activist Marcus Garvey to songs by Childish Gambino. Now popularized, it has become a term thrown around everywhere, defined as a war against the truth, to using pronouns. Its meaning is convoluted as it begins to take on a negative turn despite its historical background. Extremists and conservatives have weaponized it as a dog whistle, allowing them to not explicitly say racist or sexist opinions, but still undermining social or progressive movements. The term "go woke, go broke" emerged as many gamers began to claim that games which included wokeness would always lead to failure, both commercially and critically. Games like Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League failed because it was based on a woke version of the Arkham universe, in which characters like Harley Quinn were more conservatively dressed than previously, and there were things like pride flags hanging out in base headquarters. Concord failed because their heroes were not attractive enough, and they were virtue signaling by putting pronouns on their select screens. Of course, these aren't the actual problems of the game. Suicide Squad's failure was because of numerous issues in creative direction, outdated trends, and lack of variety within gameplay. It also didn't feel true to characters, not just talking about appearance, but that Captain Boomerang, who has Boomerang in his name, uses the same guns as every single playable character within the video game, removing what is distinctly interesting and central to his character. Concord was just unable to compete within the oversaturated hero shooter market, especially when you have to pay an upfront cost to play the game, partnered with its lack of creative design. There are also games that have been incredibly successful despite being criticized as being woke. Alan Wake 2 became categorized as woke when belief rose that Saga Anderson, the female protagonist, was originally white and race-swapped into a black woman. Despite its wokeness, it didn't go broke, winning many critically acclaimed awards and was commercially successful. And then there's Baldur's Gate 3, an incredibly successful game and honestly a breath of fresh air from the typical games being released. While still filled with an onslaught of woke agenda with pronouns and the ability to change genitals of a character, there was even an outrage in that adding male genitals to a feminine character made the genitals bigger than it was originally on a masculine character. But none of these things really mattered to the game because it didn't affect the playability, mechanics, nor the narrative, as it was just genuinely a good game. One Reddit user framed how the phrase "go woke, go broke" is just nonsense fantastically. If someone hates something that is diverse, then the diversity is a singular reason why the thing is bad or failed. We fail to see the broader picture, tunnel-visioned into nonsensical ideas that diversity is the problem. It is much easier to complain about games such as The Last of Us as being too woke, as opposed to actually engaging with the material. You've probably heard this statement recently, probably either around Assassin's Creed Shadows with the protagonist Yasuke, a black samurai, or the just newly announced Ghost of Yote's female protagonist.
I said, who do you serve?
We are the shadows.
That serve the light.
Yasuke was historically a black man who worked under Oda Nobunaga, but there are a few pieces of evidence written into history about them, especially about them being samurai. While remembering that history is often complicated and not always objective, and loaded with contradictions, Assassin's Creed Shadows has upset many fans due to Yasuke. In making a game that is based upon pieces of history, it is a difficult balance to make an authentic historical representation while also writing up a good storyline and incorporating fun game mechanics. It becomes more like virtue signaling towards diversity when a story about Japanese culture has their main character not be Japanese at all, falling into a fine line of cultural appropriation. In my opinion, Yasuke could have been an interesting Easter egg as a side character instead, but nonetheless, no answer is right nor wrong when it comes to these arguments about Assassin's Creed Shadows. However, just calling the game woke is a broad term that fails to truly criticize what is wrong with the game. Does Ghost of Yote differ from these criticisms then? Also based on Japanese culture, the game itself focuses on a new protagonist, Atsu, compared to the protagonist from Ghost of Tsushima, and brings us to the region surrounding Mount Yote. From the trailer, many Japanese have praised the appreciation of Japanese culture. Even the protagonist draws from Kill Bill, with her yellow clothing and similarity in appearance to Lady Snowblood, a Japanese film about a woman's revenge, which Kill Bill was actually inspired by. So, with all these praises, what are people upset about?
Do I have to play as a girl? Can I play as a guy?
The argument for relatability is incredibly weak. So, you're saying you can't play games when you can't relate to them? Almost every protagonist we play has plenty of qualities that most normal people probably can't relate to. We are not all heroic and brave with tragic backstories that propel our lives forward. But for some mysterious reason, it's only ever female characters that players can't relate to or find not immersive. I suggest that it's because these games challenge traditional gaming culture. The gaming identity, once again, is slowly evolving to focus on newer and more diverse protagonists, and men find themselves not at the center of game development anymore. And women samurai existed. Women from noble families typically had military education, but a majority went on to become wives and mothers. Their samurai training instead used as spiritual preparation in endurance and discipline. Nonetheless, they were still considered samurai class, and famously, the Aizu women were celebrated for their martial skills and often engaged in military operations. Ghost of Yote comes off as more of a true cultural appreciation of Japan, while Assassin's Creed Shadow's protagonist feels more of a checkbox towards diversity. Of course, while diversity is great as it allows people to see themselves within these worlds, there is always a time and place for handling it correctly. It is distasteful not seeing a Japanese protagonist in a game that celebrates or uses Japanese culture, just as a game that celebrates African American culture having a white protagonist would be equally concerning. When it comes to this argument, it is quite valid. Forced diversity can be just as bad as no diversity. Adding someone because you believe it would add character or nuance to the game or narrative is different to if you're checking something off the DEI framework just for the sake of it. It's once again a bit difficult to find the balance between wanting to add diversity into your game or just forcing it completely. Understanding of different diverse groups is often required if you don't want to stereotype or make it feel out of place. Some categories of games find it easier to include diversity, ones that allow you to create your own character, games that don't have direct ties to real-world culture. But ultimately, how diversity is represented is up to the game developers' own ideas and beliefs. I also wanted to mention that both the games discussed have not been released yet. We have not seen the final version, nor has anyone played the game to experience the full storyline and gameplay. As such, I think all arguments should just be taken with a grain of salt, and wokeness shouldn't be the reason to not buy a game when you just took or heard that opinion from someone else's mouth. You should always be critical and form your own opinions on whether or not you want to engage with the material. Nonetheless, pointing to a game that has diversity and calling it woke can be disillusioning and uncritical to the real issues of the game. It allows people to use wokeness as a scapegoat of games becoming worse, rather than the plethora of microtransactions, pay-to-win games, and the monopolization of video games that reduce quality and innovation. So, I once again ask, is it really the woke agenda destroying games?